Hello and welcome to YHTV's Trinity of Life. This is episode 53. I'm Christina Suzuma, your host of this program. Thank you so much for joining me as I continue to explore the wonderful world of healing arts, meditation, therapies, and the many modalities of helping each of us find balance in our individual journeys. We're always excited to meet those who are on the leading edge of creating change on this planet. Today we shall be speaking of the Five Tibetans. And I have to admit, when I was approached by the author a few months ago, I actually I had heard of the Five Tibetans, but I wasn't familiar with it. So here is our guest today, an amazing gentleman whose passion is clearly immersed in the healing arts, from yoga to plant medicine. He has authored The Five Tibetans over 30 years ago, and he continues to practice and teach this form to many individuals supporting communities throughout the world. I'd like to welcome Chris Killam. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Christine. It's nice to be with you today. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thank you. We are honored. I don't know which to call you, yoga guru or medicine hunter or a man of the world.
Chris is good. I respond to most friendly titles pretty well.
Most friendly titles, that's good. So, Chris, can you share with us a little bit of your background and your history?
Do you want a yoga background, or do you want a sort of a sprawling human epic story? Which one works for you?
Oh my. Me personally, I love the human epic story. But you know what we can do? If we want to focus on the yoga background, since we are speaking about yoga, oh my gosh, everything you do, it is yoga. So it's sort of that balance that we have to find today. Why don't we start with the yoga background?
All right. I started practicing yoga daily around, the summer of 1970, actually, which is a little bit of a while ago. But I came to yoga through transcendental meditation, and also got hold of a book, Richard Hittleman's 28-Day Yoga Plan. And because I was very enthusiastic about yoga, I thought, well, why do in 28 days what you can do in 4? So I basically went through the whole book and, did everything and discovered that I could actually do it, which was a delightful surprise for me, because as a kid, I sat a lot in in lotus, and I also did plow pose a lot in front of the TV. I don't know why, but I did. And but other than that, I really didn't have any yoga background or training. I had a natural fascination for it. And once I started, it was like a fish discovering water. It was just an amazing experience for me. And that, as you know, was 43 years ago. And I have, from that time forward, maintained a yoga and meditation practice daily, and have traveled all around the world in my work investigating medicinal plants, practicing yoga. When I walk into a hotel room or someplace, that the very first thing I do is figure out, okay, where am I going to practice? And my yoga got a substantial boost in the 70s when I lived in a yoga ashram for just shy of 5 years. I actually lived in a Kundalini yoga ashram, first in Massachusetts and then in Atlanta. And we were fire-breathing nuts. We practiced. We got up at 2:30 in the morning, practiced for 4 or 5 hours every day, and then I taught classes. So there were a number of years where my daily routine lasted anywhere from 5 to 8 hours, depending on the number of classes I taught in a day. And while I really think that's extreme, it gave me this tremendous boost for practice, so that when I sort of backed down to something more reasonable, like a 2-hour daily practice, it just became very, very easy and not a strain. So I have found yoga a constant companion. I've found the original Yoga Sutras to be rich in life wisdom that is really beneficial and valuable for me. And I've found people in the yoga community to be generally very sweet and kind and humane. And once in a while, I get called out of mothballs to go teach at something like the Midwest Yoga Conference. And I always have a very good time. I mean, yoga is very different from when I got involved with it, but the spirit of yoga persists. And I find, that I'm delightful to be one of the many participants enjoying yoga and spreading the word.
Now, I'm curious. Now, you were raised here in the States?
I was raised in the States. I was raised right outside of Boston,
Hmm.
and so I was kind of like a typical suburban kid, and had both my parents worked, and I lived in a neighborhood where there were lots and lots of kids my age. Most of the parents had gotten their mortgages on the GI Bill, so I grew up around a lot of kids. And in fact, the kid next door and I used to do races across the backyard on our knees in full lotus. So kind of a weird thing, but we'd lock
Oh,
ourselves into lotus and then get up on our knees and then charge across the yard, knee after knee after knee, and it was pretty
that's
bizarre.
so funny that you mentioned that because I used to do that. That is
Really?
so, you just brought back like a moment in my life that I have was locked back here somewhere.
Well, there are
Yes.
no new ideas under the sun. You see? There you go.
Wow.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
now your parents, were they even into any kind of health or yoga or anything like that?
Well, actually, they were into healthy eating because my dad was a type 1 insulin dependent diabetic. So
Hmm.
he had to eat clean food. He couldn't eat sugar. We rarely had desserts. We always had salads. I mean, today you would look at what we ate and say it was a relatively clean diet, not much by way of fast food or processed food. And that awareness,
Yes.
that understanding of the dietary connection and the health connection proved very valuable later on in life as I made my way into the natural food sector and do what I do now, researching natural medicinal plants around the world.
Fantastic. And no siblings?
No siblings. I proved to be, just
Just
so much
enough.
that we couldn't possibly do this twice. So.
Oh, but isn't that interesting how fortunate that through your father's situation that you were actually gifted with such clean eating and
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that, life throws all kinds of stuff at us. For example, my parents were both in radio and TV. My mother was talent, and my dad was in the production and sales side. So I grew up with newscasters and disc jockeys and, radio and news and
wow.
sports people. And so that exposure led me to media at a very early age, and that has also served me well in my career as an adult. So I think we can draw on the experiences that we have even in our formative years and
Mhm.
carry them forward throughout life.
Now this is so interesting. Were they into transcendental meditation themselves? Is that
Oh,
how you
not
got
at all.
into it?
No, no, no.
Oh.
My friends, a friend of ours, a certain friend got into TM, and then he told the rest of us about it, and it sounded great. It sounded like something we wanted to experience, and so a number of us wound up learning. And then from there, I additionally explored various forms of yoga and wound up just going very deeply into non-TM related yogic methods of meditation and of course physical practice as well.
Mm, mm, magnificent. Well, that's good. Now, what did your parents think of all this?
Well, I broke some furniture along the way. I mean, falling over, practicing inverted poses, and they weren't that keen about that, actually, knocking over lamps and busting tables and things. But it wasn't like I wrecked a whole furniture store worth of stuff. They on the one hand, had an appreciation for me doing whatever it was that I was interested in. And I think on the other hand, they found it just plain weird at times.
And after all this time with you taking these courses and these classes and then living at an ashram, did they even think of entering in or attempting?
My mother, they're both gone. My mother practiced a little bit of yoga in the mornings for a while, but it really wasn't her. It really wasn't her thing. She wound up.
Mm,
She always did something for fitness. She had an exercise routine, but in terms of really adopting a yogic life or the precepts of yoga or a serious practice, no, neither of them was interested in doing that. I'm the sole person in my family who wound up taking up this path. And I'm quick to say that I do not believe that we find yoga. Really, I think that yoga finds us. I think that yoga is a current that runs through all of human history, and it picks us up. Um, and it doesn't pick us up because we're special or because we're so marvelous. I think it picks us up simply because we're adequate for the job of carrying this current forward throughout time. And
mm,
the whole purpose of it is to bring peace and greater health and vitality and understanding and awareness to people. And yoga needs us to move it along through history. So I got picked up and my parents didn't. That's the
mm,
way it sorted out.
mm, mm, mm. That's quite a journey that you've taken. Now you were introduced to it wasn't at that time called the Five Tibetans, right? That's what you ended up calling it. Is that correct?
Right. When I was introduced to the Five Tibetans, they were known as the Five Rites of Rejuvenation. And
Mhm.
I was actually living in the high desert in Southern California in Joshua Tree at the time.
Wow.
And I met a woman who was in her 70s who was from New York. And she was this really funny woman. She was a guru hopper. And she would say, "Hey,
Wait a
what
minute.
secret
What is a
practice do you
guru hopper?
know?" Oh,
please,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
please, please define what a guru hopper is.
She had been to every guru there was, and Swami Satchidananda and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and Vishnu Devananda and that crazy guy who started Ekankar and you name it. Any guru that came through, any secret mantra that was to be learned, any initiation, she had done it. And she was very funny. I mean, a real character. And she was, on the one hand, a lovely and warm-hearted and spiritually aware woman, and on the other hand, she was just like a comedian, and she would tell me her experiences of being with this particular teacher or that particular psychic, and she was sort of an endless fountain of amusement. And one day she said, I got something I think you'd like," and she gave me a little book by a guy named Peter Kelder. And this book had been published in 1935, and it was called The Five Rites of Rejuvenation. And the very first thing I thought was, wow, really bad title. But the book, it was illustrated and it described these methods that you would practice every day and that they enhanced overall vitality and youth and strength and energy. And I found the story compelling. So around well, this was in 77. I practiced them a couple of times, but I started to practice them daily the following year. And I was teaching yoga. I'd been teaching yoga since the early 70s. So I incorporated the Five Tibetans into my practice. And I also thought Five Rites of Rejuvenation, bad name. Since they supposedly came from Tibet, I called them the Five Tibetans. So, yeah, I'm the person who actually named the Five Tibetans the Five Tibetans.
Mm, mm.
And I've
So,
been practicing
and
them
that makes
now
sense
since,
though.
hey, yeah, yeah.
It makes sense. It makes sense. So when I kept meditating, going, where have I heard this from? Since I met you, it's like, where have I heard this from? And it finally keyed in. There was a lovely woman in her 90s that I would do Zen meditation with, and she was a yogi. She was the one who did the Five Tibetans every day.
Uh,
And she
uh,
says, "Oh yes," and now, it just came to me like last night. Oh, it was Marie. She has since passed, but she was in her 90s when she did. But even in her 90s, she did it. She did an hour of yoga every day, but she faithfully did the Five Tibetans every day.
Well, they're a remarkable series of methods. They take about 10 minutes to perform. Most physically fit people, and reasonably fit, I don't mean super fit, can do the five Tibetans. And I always finish my practice with them every day. The last thing I do to round out my my asana practice and my practice of different methods drawn from varied traditions is practice the five Tibetans.
Now, you launched this book in the 70s, 76, is that correct?
No,
78?
actually, the Five Tibetans, the book itself is a little bit more than 20 years old. I've been practicing these for 35 years,
I
but
see.
uh, it's about 20 years old, and I call it sort of the little book that could. The Five
That's great.
Tibetans is now in 27 languages. It's published
Magnificent.
in more countries than that. I mean, I have volumes of this that I can't read in Japanese and Cyrillic and alphabets that I don't even understand, let
Mm.
alone languages I don't understand. And I've seen it for example, in bookshops around the world. I saw it in the Bombay airport bookstore, which made me very, very happy. I was really kind of excited that I was bringing yoga to Indians. I thought that was a good sign somehow. Um, it's a simple book, and intentionally so. It has methods of meditation in addition to describing and photographically illustrating the
Mhm.
five Tibetans. Um, and really, my objective was to give people a simple volume that they could use for powerful daily practice, and a practice that would not be exhaustible, something that would keep giving energy, keep imparting inspiration, keep enabling people to go deeper. And according to the feedback I've gotten, that mission has been accomplished. So I'm very happy to have participated in the yoga scene in this way with this particular book.
Oh, absolutely. Now it's 27 languages. That's fantastic. Well,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
definitely have to see which languages and how and where to get them because of the different communities that we have, around the world.
sure, sure.
Um, so now wow, this is just amazing. Now, did the form that you have and that you've written about in the Five Tibetans, was it altered in any way from the original form that you had learned?
Well, in the original book, there was no specified breathing. And
Mm.
I knew that that was incorrect. And I had practiced some Tibetan yoga, and I had practiced some Chinese Qigong,
Hmm.
and I knew that the breathing in both of those was somewhat different from the breathing, let's say, in a majority of Hatha yoga practices. Um, and so I applied breathing to the five Tibetans. Some of it, when people who are used to just practicing, let's say, more conventional methods of yoga, try the five Tibetans, they wonder if the breathing is backwards. Inhaling when, for example, when the legs come up instead of when the legs go down.
Mm.
But I was faithful to what I had learned in other methods of Tibetan yoga. So I did modify these that way, and that was the only modification I made. I have seen on the internet there must be at least 15 or 20 different versions of the five Tibetans now on YouTube, people showing them visually. And I have yet to find any one in which there isn't at least one mistake. So, in terms of foot placement or body movement, so I'm always encouraging people to practice these correctly and to incorporate the breaths as I have.
Mm. Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, I believe the breath would be a very valuable thing that that you've
Oh
added
yeah.
in there, because
Oh
really
sure. Well,
all yoga practice, it does evolve around the breath, right?
it does. And it's funny too though, Christine, we have drifted in our practice of yoga in this culture. It's become a very physical thing.
Mm.
And if you've read the yoga scriptures, if you actually go back to the original texts ever written about yoga. Asanas and the physical forms represent a very small part of yoga practice, not a significant part of yoga practice. In fact, every major yoga scripture says that there are only two essential asanas. One being siddhasana, which is a sitting meditation position, and the other being lotus, which is a sitting meditation position. I've met many yogis in India who are profoundly wise and lively and startlingly aware and clear minded and energetic, who all they do is yogic meditation. So we've really taken the more physical dimensions of yoga and run with those in this culture.
Mhm.
And that's actually too bad, because without the rest of the practice, without the codes of conduct, without the daily meditation, without the great emphasis on character and how we choose to live, it really winds up being another form of very pleasant gymnastics, but
Mhm.
somewhat gymnastic nonetheless. So I really want people to get the actual spirit of yoga. And the spirit of yoga is spirit itself, tapping into the unlimited, vast, infinite divine, and having that constant connection to govern everything that we do and everything that we are in our lives.
Beautifully said. Very interestingly enough, I used to teach other forms of workouts, things like that. Everything from jazzercise all the way up. And every time someone mentioned yoga, I mean, I had a yoga placed in front of me when I was maybe about 10 or 11 years old. And I'd look at it and go, oh my gosh, these people are turning themselves into pretzels, and I'd go, I can't do that, and I could remember, I think it was my sister-in-law that said, but you can, you're young enough to do that. And I'm like, why don't you do it? If that's the case. And it just turned me off. The pictures and all would just turn me off and go, "Ugh, that's like, as you say, it's like gymnastics." And I'm going,
Hmm.
no, my body won't flex like that. And et cetera, et cetera. And through the years, it was the same thing. No, I'm not interested in yoga. No, I'm not interested in yoga. And yet I ventured into the healing arts of body work, of metaphysics, et cetera. And one day I had wanted to support my fellow colleague that just opened up her yoga studio. you know, have to, being Asian, I have to give face, right?
Sweet.
And I went. And she was teaching the form, is called Shivananda.
Hmm.
And I went and said, okay, you can do this. And because I had already been practicing Zen meditation for a while and different forms of meditation and connecting through healing arts, working on people's bodies and connecting in, wow, I was so locked in and she began her classes with breathing exercises first, with pranayama first.
Hmm.
And already, being caught up in a lot of lung issues as a child, I could feel both sides of the lungs open up. Everything begin to open up. And then into the asanas. And as I'm doing these asanas and watching and following, I could feel the connection and all the chakras aligning. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, wow, what is this? And by the
Yeah,
end of
pretty
class,
impressive.
amazing. I just sat there and she looked at me and goes, well, and I looked at her and said, that was simply amazing. And she looked at me and she said, was it? I said, I'm concerned that I would get too immersed in it now because the balance, being involved again, as I say, in the metaphysics and being quite aware of my own body and how each asana, I got it already. It was a meditation. Every pose
Sure.
was a meditation. And the breath work that went with it was magnificent. And that day changed my whole outlook on what yoga was. Hence why
Well,
Yoga Hub. Hence why
it's
Yoga Hub came to be.
it sounds like your friend taught a really great class and did it right, which is a wonderful thing, so that you had a great experience, and that it is those great experiences that turn us on and carry us for a long time in practice.
Yes, yes, I do believe that. And And I agree with you that the way that yoga has been taken on in the Western Hemisphere is very much about the physical form.
Hmm.
I do believe the reason why that um, her studio didn't reach a climax of like many studios have here on the West Coast is simply because of the style that was taught.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't the workout. It was so. You did get a good sweat.
Yeah.
Even in Yin yoga now is you get a good sweat when you're doing it right. But people want that pumping, you know, one asana to the next, to the next, to the next, right?
Right, right, right. Sort of more like a cross training thing rather than it being a work in, which is what it really
Yeah,
is.
yeah, a work-in. I like that. So now with the five Tibetans and some of the poses in it, and it's always these. There are actually six.
Well, there is a sixth method that you can do that is not, it's not necessary to practice at the time that you practice the five metans, the five Tibetans. And that is ostensibly for monastic people who are not having sex and want to suppress their sex urges, which clearly is not me. But um, in any case, there is a sixth method, but the five Tibetans, as a unit of five physical exercises that are sequential and that you don't vary. This is a self-contained group that you can do every day.
Mm, mm, mm. So now there is a saying, I do believe, that um, to practice basically and bring in that sexual energy, which is the Kundalini energy, basically, and to hold it is also extremely powerful.
Well, I personally don't believe that the Kundalini energy is sexual energy. I mean, I think that energy it manifests within us and around us in a multiplicity of forms, and certainly we can use any of the energies that arise within us for practice. Whether it's sexual energy, the energy of ambition. Even stress energy. My experience of the Kundalini rising, and I've been fortunate to have a number of Kundalini experiences over my years. I don't detect any sexual dimension to it. Um, it pretty unerringly starts at the base of the spine and rises up through the spinal cord itself to the top of the head and out. But um, there are people who make the claim that the Kundalini is sexual energy. I think that it originates in a similar place as the sex organs, but I think it's a bit more complex than that. Nonetheless, we can um, we can conserve our energy or we can waste our energy depending on how we live and the behavioral and thought choices we make. And certainly, if a person is just kind of squandering their sexual energy, they're going to have less energy for practice as well.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. And now, what what would you feel are some issues that people might run into when they are first learning the five Tibetans?
Well, I think that the first one, Christine, is the very first method itself, which is a spinning method where you stand and you extend your arms straight out to the sides and you spin in a clockwise direction. There are very few people who can do that the full 21 times the first time they do it and not fall over or fall down. That's how I broke furniture, actually. It's a great method for just flying over the coffee table. I think people, myself included, people like to sort of have it all at once. And I've met a number of yogis who have started out trying to do these methods the full 21 times each, which is the number of repetitions, and have run into difficulties because they're not familiar with these methods. It takes a little bit of time. within a week or two, you can certainly be doing that if you're a trained yogi, or a little bit longer if you're not. I think so. I think impatience is one thing that people come up against, and inevitably, um, people do fight practice in general. I mean, I find that people fight meditation practice, they fight yoga practice, whatever their discipline might be, whether it's Zen or Kundalini yoga. There's often a little resistance to practice itself, and I believe that's because practice dissolves the sense of self more and more and more over time. But I think initially with the Five Tibetans, it's just getting used to the methods, practicing them correctly, and not being in a super, super hurry to do them 21 times a piece when they're brand new in your life.
Mm-hmm. So would recommend that you just do what you can to begin with?
Yeah, I recommend that people start out doing them 7 or 10 times, 7 or 10 repetitions, and get used to it. You can
Mm-hmm.
always build up. There's no problem. If you go, well, gosh, this is really easy, then fine, do more. But I think, I think doing something that's attainable is very important. I've met
Mm-hmm.
people who've, say, come to one of my yoga workshops and they say, I'm going to go home and practice yoga 2 hours every day. I know that person is not going to be practicing because they're setting too high a bar for themselves. The person who comes away from a yoga weekend and says, I could start out doing 20 or 30 minutes, maybe like 4 days a week. That's the person I suspect will continue practice because they're setting attainable goals for themselves, something that's easily achievable, and so they can stick with it. So part of the challenge is to make sure that people don't take on so much that they wind up terribly discouraged and quit entirely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So for those people who, uh, members of my family, who just tend to avoid a lot of physical exercise. When I went through your book, Chris, I looked at these and I looked at the poses and I thought, wow, this is like so wonderfully condensed and so well balanced that if you told a person that this wasn't yoga, they would have no idea, would they?
Well, I think that may be so. I mean, some people would probably pick up on the similar appearance of some of the methods, but
Hmm.
these could also just be a self-contained physical drill. You know, like some sort of a little fitness drill. I mean, they do have that appearance. The difference is that they really open up the centers of energy within you. So you have an energizing, clarifying, harmonizing experience. And that isn't always the case with any, say, 5 random exercises practiced together.
Right.
So there is an integrated whole body mind spirit effect that takes place with these. But yeah, I think you could probably sell these to people as something other than yoga. They might not know.
Yeah, because it just says Five Tibetans right now.
Right. You could say, hey, this is something that Tibetan farmers practice to stay healthy in the fields.
There you
You could probably
go.
get away with that. Right, right, right.
Well, definitely, clearly, it shows the vitality and longevity. I mean, you clearly show that. Just in your whole being, you radiate with the energy, and you look fantastic for teaching this for so many years.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that part of the benefit of yoga practice is being able to share that energy in a variety of ways. And I mean, you obviously have that. There are many other yogis I've met that have that, and it's sort of like that line in When Harry Met Sally. I'll have what she's having. When you
Hmm.
see people who are turned on, who appear happy, who appear healthy, who have lots of energy, who are positive forces, who walk into a room and somehow tip the balance in favor of the positive rather than the negative, and from whom people come away from conversations going, wow, I really enjoyed that person. Um, if you can be that, then that is basically the proof of yoga practice in daily life. I mean, I think that the monastic days, the guru days, I think they're totally over myself. And I know there are people who disagree with me, but I think this is a time for right action and right living in society where everybody needs positive and supportive influences. And yoga can't just be a self-satisfying thing that we do to get ourselves high and go, wow, I really got loaded in that class or whatever. You know, that's not a worthy mission.
Right.
That's a really lousy mission, actually. It's, hey, you know, now that I'm practicing, now that I'm meditating, now that I'm doing these methods, I understand more the interconnectedness of all things. I understand more the need to be a humane, compassionate, thoughtful, loving person in this world. Those are the real yogic goodies. If those don't happen, it's not yoga.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Chris. I think you hit on some very juicy morsels right there. And
I'm all for juicy morsels.
oh yes, yes, those are wonderful, wonderful morsels, delicious. Because I feel that that is really what's lacking. And when I hear the conversations about yoga, especially because we call ourselves Yoga Hub, the first thing is asked is, "Oh, you're a yoga teacher. Oh, you know." It's like, no, 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 no. We are the new media for health and wellness. It's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
but why do you call yourselves Yoga Hub then? I said, because that's what yoga represents: balance
Right.
in life. You know.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it
So,
does.
and yeah, through practice, and with what you do in your life, which is plant medicine, Chris, that we hope to be speaking in depth with you about in the next shows coming up. Um, the integration of food with the process of like the Five Tibetans or a wonderful yoga practice, um, how it is also able to help us balance body, mind, spirit. Can you
Hmm.
speak a little on that?
Well, sure. When you consider the traditions of yoga, so the originating traditions are found in India and Nepal and Tibet and China. When you consider them, there was no such thing as practice without attention to the foods you eat and the medicinal plants that you use. In fact, in one of my favorite yogic books, Tibetan Yoga and the Secret Doctrines, which is a, a, a very large volume that gives a number of the key Tibetan Buddhist yoga teachings. It says that a yogi must know the medicinal plants. And I think that understanding the role that diet plays in health and understanding the judicious use of plant medicines is absolutely essential. It's just like right conduct in yoga. You don't do a bunch of yoga and then go out and beat people up for fun on a Saturday night. That's not yoga practice, you know. That's not what happens. And um, if you're actually living an integrated yogic life, then by definition, you're also working with the medicinal plants. These things can enhance all aspects of personal health, whether you're talking about digestion or mood or respiration or cardiovascular function or immune function or energy, stamina, endurance, alertness. And so as you're practicing, if you're also integrating the use of medicinal plants, and there are 50,000 plants around the world that are used as medicines, then you have an advantage and you're actually, you know, engaged in an integrated yogic lifestyle rather than just certain select aspects of yoga, as you know, for example, asanas and physical methods. So from my standpoint, having read and greatly appreciating the original yogic scriptures, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and the Yoganu Sasanam and the Shiva Samhita and the Garaksa Sataka, these other foundation texts of yoga that really describe it in its fullness, it's very apparent to me that the plants and the dietary measures go hand in hand with the rest of practice.
A question, because of your knowledge in plant medicine, the difference, not just in the plant medicine, but also the yogic styles between the Tibetan and the Indian?
Well, what I see is that the regionalization of yoga has a lot to do with weather. For example,
Ah,
if you go to South India, the yoga that's practiced there involves extreme flexibility, which makes sense. You know, if you go to a hot tropical place, you're much more loose and flexible than if you're in a cold place. In Tibet, especially in the Himalayan hill region, where a lot of the monasteries were prior to the Chinese invasion and destruction of the Tibetan culture, there was a tremendous emphasis on generating heat.
mm,
So you know, you have heat generating methods that you don't have in the South, because the last thing they need in the South is to be hotter. Um, and there's very little emphasis in Tibetan, like the monastic Tibetan Buddhist yoga, on flexibility. There's some, certainly enough to sit comfortably in meditation for hours at a time. Um, so in a way, yoga methods are a lot like cookery. If you go to Greece, for example, you're going to find a method and style of cooking that is adapted to the ingredients and the culture and the climate. If you go to Russia, let's say to Moscow, it's going to be different. If you go to the South Pacific, it's going to be different still. The yogic methods arise out of a fundamental and essential principle that we are all spirit in a body, and that practice helps us to be aware of and completely integrated consciously with that spirit. But the actual methods themselves may vary tremendously. And I have determined that much of that has to do with something as simple as weather and climate and outdoor temperature.
mm, mm.
Mm.
Well, that
I
that
mean, when
all
I
makes
lived in the
sense.
yoga, yeah,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry for
Yes.
interrupting.
No, go ahead. What you were
No,
saying?
when I lived in the yoga ashram in Western Massachusetts, we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't spend a lot on heat. And so we did a lot of methods that made us hot, because otherwise we were cold. So it was kind of necessity is the mother of invention here. And I certainly find that as I transition from winter here in New England, which is where my wife Zoe and I live, to spring and summer here, that my practice annually kind of shifts to more flexibility oriented methods as the season gets warmer.
Mm, mm. Makes sense. Well, here in California, we stay pretty warm.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Um, and your wife practices as well?
She does. She does. She started practicing when we got together, and she's having her own experience of discovery with yoga practice. And um, I'm basically around to offer guidance. And other than that, I'm pretty light touch in the matter. Sometimes she'll say, "Hey, I really want to learn some new stuff," and so I'll show her some additional things. We meditate together at night, and that also just, I think, helps with everything else in our lives.
Questions has just come in. May I share them with you?
Yeah, please.
What are the similarities of the spinning to the whirling dervishes? Hmm.
Well, with the dervishes, they go and go and go for hours at a time. I mean, I've seen Sufi dancers just spin, for like an hour, and
Wow.
it's really a freeing, remarkable, ecstatic thing that they do. And so the spinning itself is somewhat similar, but in the Five Tibetans, you only do it for 21 times.
Mm,
And I'm quick to say that these were the instructions that Peter Kelder outlined in his original book in 1935. And there are no other guidelines than that. Pretty much everything derives from what he described.
mm,
So, what would happen if you did each of these 1,000 times a piece? I have no idea, really. I've always practiced the Five Tibetans the way they were described, but certainly I have at times just for fun. In fact, a few times when I've done presentations for groups, I've just stood up on a stage and spun for 5 or 10 minutes and talked, which people find endlessly amusing. But I think the similarity is that the spinning is spinning, but in the case of the Sufis, they're doing it as a method of ecstasy for long, long periods of time.
It's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so interesting because I remember being taught a long time ago that even with children, like with babies, people are very careful and cuddle their little newborn babies, were to actually hold them and spin with them.
Well, this is exercise for the inner ears, for the
Hmm.
eustachian tubes. It's like doing inner ear push ups, really. It is the case that if we don't use different parts of our bodies, we will lose function with them. And we see a common health problem among elderly people is that they
Yes.
lose balance, they fall down, and they break bones. And this is very serious. If you can maintain strong legs and strong posture, and also maintain good balance by doing balancing poses and by the spinning, you can help to avoid a very, very common health problem. I think it's hard when somebody's in their 20s or 30s or even 40s to imagine their 80s or 90s
Mm.
and to think when they practice and not only have the integrating conscious experience, the whole experience of spirit, but also to be aware that they're making an investment in something that hasn't taken place, that is decades from now. But
Yes.
we can practice these methods to make our senior years far more bearable and enjoyable.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I got to tell you, I can't wait to get my 87-year-old mother to spin.
Just have her spin 3 times slowly to start.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Because that that's true. The hearing starts to go, and they don't believe that it can improve. Which that's the sad part of the society today is like, oh, I'm old now, or that's what they're led to believe. And of course, our medical system sometimes doesn't help in that manner, where they go, oh well, just keep disintegrating. It doesn't.
Sure. Well, and also you do encounter a lot of doctors and people who are healthcare practitioners who are in very poor health.
Oh
So their
yes.
expectations of what is possible are extremely limited. I mean, I've been fortunate to spend time with some very senior yogis. One man who I spent 3 weeks with a Swami who was 83. He'd been practicing yoga since he was 18, and he was spectacular. And the thing that impressed me about him was his unflagging kindness. And I thought, wow, I'd like to be half the person this guy is when I'm
Mm.
his age. And then I also studied a method of meditation with a yogi who was, I think at the time, 91. And he was this
Mm.
beautiful looking man with clear mind and great eyes and beautiful skin. And I just thought, this guy
Wow.
should be on the cover of every health magazine.
And no doubt he is so humble that he wouldn't even approach it, right?
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, it is quite amazing. I did a wonderful inspirational interview with a woman by the name of Phyllis Suze here in California, and she, through her years, she always, as she would say, I poo-pooed yoga. Well, Phyllis started her yoga practice when she was 84.
Wow.
And
Wow.
she just turned last month 90.
That's remarkable. That's
Isn't
remarkable.
it amazing?
Yeah.
She started at 84. She was 90. And in the interview we did with her, she is seen doing the peacock.
Oh, amazing.
Isn't it? I
Amazing.
mean, I can't even do
Yeah.
the peacock. It's like I'm watching her going, Phyllis. And she says to me, she does about, in total, I do believe she said about 2 hours of yoga, 2 to 3 hours of yoga every day, from the
Mhm.
pranayama in the morning in bed and the stretches. And then she goes to her class after breakfast and then comes home, takes a nap. And then she goes to her tango classes. And she's a tango dancer, and she says, I will not be able to tango if I don't do my yoga.
Right,
So they
right,
go hand
right.
in hand, and that's her full day.
That is fabulous.
Isn't
Well,
it?
I think it is never too late. But of course, it's a tremendous privilege and advantage to take these things up earlier. I mean,
Mhm.
however it is that you come to it, in your case through Zen meditation, which I think probably gave you innumerable practice advantages, or in my case, shortly after becoming initiated in TM,
Mhm.
whatever it is that can move us into yoga practice, if it's something that we can do earlier in life, I think that just makes everything else in life that much better.
Yes, yes, I absolutely agree with you. We had a comment that came in. So this is a great practice for someone with terrible equilibrium.
Well, I think that if a person has terrible equilibrium, then they certainly know one of the potential problems that they face as they age. And in that case, I mean, if a person has really bad equilibrium, then I would suggest that they try spinning, 3 times really slowly. I mean, turtle slowly. You can always start someplace. You can always start doing one push up. Yeah, I would say that if a person has bad equilibrium, um, they already know that they're going to encounter difficulties down the road. So getting into the spinning now could be a tremendous preventive thing to do.
Mm, mm, wonderful. Another question that came in. How do you find and create a well-rounded yogic practice?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I sort of like what Bruce Lee said about the martial arts. He said, absorb what is useful. All the time, people say, what kind of yoga do you practice? And I say, yoga, yoga. And they want me to say, oh, I practice Ashtanga or Anusara or Iyengar, whatever. No, yoga, yoga. Um, I have found that I have a wonderful practice derived from classical hatha yoga and Kundalini yoga and Tibetan yoga and Chinese Qigong and methods that I've learned from different systems, including Iyengar and Ashtanga and others. And I've put them together in a way that is satisfying and whole for me and that works for me. I think that um, a lot of yoga appeals to certain temperaments, one more than another. So if a
Mm,
person is new to yoga, then I think it's worth trying different styles and methods and finding out what you like, and not being conned into believing that any one of them is the superior system, because that is not so. It's never the case that it's the yoga system that's superior. It is often the case that the yoga practitioner has superior attention.
mm,
Um, so I think try out what you like. You might find that eventually, after doing a whole number of classes, you want to create an amalgam that is yours and yours only, which is how all these systems ever got designed in the first place. Somebody did that.
mm.
Much of yoga today was derived from the British military physical fitness drills that Indian people learned during the Raj era, and that weren't yoga methods at all. So, um, take those things that you like. I also recommend that people try methods that they find difficult and practice them, say for 2 or 3 years every day, until they don't mind practicing them anymore. I think that's also a method worth doing. I used to really hate bow pose, and so I did it every year or every day for about 4 or 5 years, and then finally I loved it. Now I don't do bow pose anymore, but I don't care one way or another.
Sounds like me with the crow.
Right?
Took me a year and a half.
Only a year and a half.
Only a year and a
Oh, wonderful.
half. Oh my. So a question is, how would you know which form to become certified in?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask in that regard because I've never been certified in anything. I mean, I've taught for about 42 years, but I've never undergone a certification course. Um,
Oh,
no, I mean my
well,
training. I probably trained about 5, 6,000 hours in yoga. So studying with other people, but I don't know. I'm neither a fan of nor a critic of certification. I would say pick a system that you like if certification is what you want. And more importantly, pick a teacher that you can respect and you can trust. In the yogic scene, as in all other scenes, there are opportunists, there are egomaniacs, there are people who are in it for the money. And then you have a lot of sweet, lovely, high, humane, wonderful people who are doing it to spread the Dharma. It's the latter person that I want to study from. I would much rather study from an unknown whose heart and mind are completely intact than
mhm.
study with somebody who's a celebrity who needs a Rolls Royce and flashy jewelry to get around.
Mm, mm. Well, that was a wonderful answer. Thank you.
Welcome.
So we are we're coming to the top of our hour, Chris. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I think it's that yoga helps us to realize the sacred in daily life. Yoga doesn't create union. The union is always there. I mean, we're never not a part of the universe. We're never actually separate from anything else. But we don't realize that unity, and yoga helps us to realize that unity. And the real realization of that means that we live that unity. So we live more humane, we live more compassionate, we live more thoughtful, we live more wise. We don't take advantage of others. So really, you can draw from this deep, 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 ceaseless well of inspiration and life and divinity. And I can't think of anything that's more wonderful than that.
Mm, lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. Oh, it's just been wonderful spending time with you. Thank you.
Same here, Christine. I've enjoyed it. Has an hour flown by? Is that what has
An
taken
hour
place here?
has flown by.
Okay. It's kind of like when you meditate and then the gong goes off and you go, I thought I just sat down. Right.
Wait, stop. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for honoring our community. It really is a joy. And I just wanted to hold up your book here to show everyone. And we will also have the links to it. Now, I'm assuming, is this available through your site as well?
Yeah, you can go on to medicinehunter.com, which is my website, and there's a whole yoga section there too. But you'll find the Five Tibetans in the book section. You'll find the Five Tibetans on Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble. The publisher is Inner Traditions. They do a lot of yogic and
Hmm.
spiritual books. It's pretty easy to find. I mean, like I said, it's in more languages than I can read, so
Oh, yes.
it's out
I
there.
can't wait to find the Chinese versions of this.
Right, 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 right.
Well,
Well, you
I
can
mean,
understand them. I can't.
no, actually, I can't. But I'm dealing with the whole community and trying to raise awareness in the community.
Okay.
So it'd be wonderful. I want
Sure,
to know what the
sure.
Tibetans think about all this.
Well, actually, that was something I wondered too, and I wrote different people over time, trying to get confirmation that these actually were Tibetan in nature, and I eventually got word back through somebody from a Tibetan Lama who said, "Oh yeah, yeah, no, I know these methods. These in fact are Tibetan in nature." So that's the best information I've got.
Mm, Well, if I run into anyone who is Tibetan, I will definitely ask them what they think about
Fantastic.
your book in 27 languages. So thank you so much, Chris Killam, and we look forward to having you back here on YHTV, whether it be here on Trinity of Life or the Magical Medical Tour.
Well,
And
thank you, Christine. It's
yeah,
been a pleasure and an honor.
thank you. And of course, I would like to thank the Yoga Hub team for making all this possible, and to each and every one of you for joining us in this new platform of education and information. We're grateful for your continuous support, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on how we can serve you better. We invite you to join us live on Tuesdays for Magical Medical Tour at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Wednesdays for Trinity of Life at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, followed every other week with Flowing into Awareness with Anatara. And also, if you would like to ask us any questions, leave us any comments, if it's easier for you to dial in, you can dial into 818 Let's Talk, which is 818-538-7825. And for those of you who might like to see the inspirational story of Phyllis Suze, our 90-year-old friend, that is our episode 25 on Trinity of Life. And it is titled A Dance of a Lifetime, and quite a lifetime she's had. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Namaste.
So if you choose to be happy, you're going to have more happy people around you.
And you know, happiness, and I always say, you know, just that simple smile, it's infectious.
And you know what? Even, and this is in my book too, even if you don't feel happy about something, even when you just put in a fake smile, your body's chemicals, the hormones in your body start shifting.